Ryan Christian, Last American Vagabond. We did a separate video about your participation in a new platform called Super You, and that being a place to protect free speech, especially in a time where there's a lot of attacks on that, especially as it relates to COVID. And so I found this article, which a lot of people said I'm like way behind on, even though I think it's, I don't know. Is it new? It's sort of new, but apparently, if you live in your world, where I'm still dipping my toes into, as somebody who was in mainstream media and asleep, I think in some ways for many years, this concerns me. So this article, I guess, is written by Peter Hotez, and he's a really well-known and what do you call him? A vaccine scientist, I guess.
Yeah, this guy is rough. I recommend
he's been on Rogan.
To him. Well, he's bad. I mean, this guy he's the way that if you listen to him talk about these things, he's aggressive in his way and the way he talks about it. And this article is a perfect example of that. Mm-hmm. But he's also very, dismissive of things that are not valid to dismiss. I mean, this guy has an agenda. Let's put it that way. And I mean, Jared, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, no, totally. I brought up one time when we talked a few videos ago on my channel, I brought up, I couldn't remember his name, but this was the guy I was talking about when I said I saw this guy on Rogan's podcast talking about vaccines. And when Rogan asked him, well, why don't you just debate these people? He said that he doesn't do that because it would give credence to their ideas as if they're in any way worthy of debate. They're just, and that's the lunacy that he thinks it is.
Which right out of the gate, there are plenty of highly educated, well-credentialed people that are making valid arguments about these things. Like, not these things are going to turn you into a monkey, which is how they try to frame this. But here are some studies that are very clearly peer-reviewed, random controlled trial type studies that are finding that there are issues with the strike protein or whatever. And the fact that he tries to, the same way that the government is doing, tries to frame anybody who disagrees with him as some fringe in your basement weirdo conspiracy theorist is insulting to everyone's intelligence, right? And that's when you see someone doing that, the world does not operate in absolutes like that, where you're either we're all correct or you're a conspiracy theorist. I mean, it's just ignorant.
So the particularly concerning part about this article, and then related to, say, Super You, this new platform that you're working with, is that it appears, if I'm reading this correctly, if you go down basically to the bottom, this is where he's basically arguing in favor of gloves off fight against anti-vaxxers, and that the whole just countering the hesitancy or the desire for safe vaccines or the questions about the COVID vaccines, that it's not just enough to put out information to rebut that, but now we really need to take some aggressive efforts. And here he says that they must expand into the realm of cybersecurity, law enforcement, public education, and international relations. Alarming. A high-level interagency task force reporting to the UN Secretary General could assess the full impact of anti-vaccine aggression and propose tough, balanced measures. So what does this do to well, let's just say, like, Super You, or just any person that is that's asking questions about this stuff? Are you now an enemy of the state? Are you now a terrorist? What does this guy want here?
That's what I mean. Look, let's not mince words here. He is calling for actual action, like aggressive physical action on people that are saying things he doesn't agree with, which is crazy to me. But you realize the or what's the right word for it? The symbolism here, aggression, confront, counteroffensive. These are all terms he's used in here. It's very militaristic, but also recognize his call in the United Nations. Are we shocked? Are we surprised that he's bringing this to an international level so we can have, it's all about the same direction we're going, right? The Great Reset, all the different things, technocracy and all these things that they're building. And these aren't secrets anymore. Build Back Better is used internationally, and it's Biden's running campaign, right? This is a clear written agenda to drive in this direction. Vaccines are playing a very prominent role, whether it's passports or the nanotechnology aspect. They're all very clear discussions. But to your point, what he is calling for here is physical action against people that are saying things about vaccines that he doesn't agree with. But of course, that's all anti-vax, right? Despite people like RFK Jr. being adamantly not anti-vax and just saying we're anti-bad science, right? He's very clear about supporting other vaccine technology, but they'll still call him anti-vax because they're trying to represent them as bad guys here. And remember, this is exactly what Whitney Webb and I've been talking about from the very beginning. In this article, if you read it, and I highly recommend you do, he ties this thread from anti-vaccine discussions to domestic terrorism to foreign actors and all the way back around. And this is exactly what we keep telling you. He's trying to frame people out there like us having honest discussions as literal domestic terrorists, as threats to national security. I mean, how does that even cross when you realize that there's a bigger agenda happening here? And I mean, just the fact that we realize in the United States, where we pretend we have free speech, he is literally calling for anybody arguing that these things are, or even just having a discussion like we're doing about whether they are dangerous, as somebody who is actually committing a crime and needs to go to jail, like as a threat to, I mean, this is really alarming. And I'm glad you brought this up.
So this paragraph right here, he says, I have a long-standing disagreement with many of my U.S. public health colleagues. I admire their commitment to disease prevention, but when I ask for a more direct way to counter anti-vaccine aggression, so yeah, it's
right,
that.
Right.
I'm told that's not our approach. Confrontation gives them a platform and oxygen. In my opinion,
it's also illegal.
Yeah. And he goes, this attitude reflects a time when we had dial-up modems. Today, the anti-vaccine empire has hundreds of websites. So, the first thing I think that's funny here is like the pharmaceutical companies don't have an empire. Like you and you know what I mean? Like, first off, like you said, the whole anti-vax thing is what is it? Do they call that the straw man argument, or like what would be the correct term for that?
Yeah, that works. It's sort of ad hominem as well. I mean, what you're doing there is broad brushing anybody anywhere. I mean, where's the metrics? Like, how do you monitor? How do you find that out? How is it 58 million people? which sites is he using? I guarantee you he's grabbing things like the entire community of the Defender, right? And they're just lumping it all together with anybody on any Facebook page they can count and going, there's your interconnected massive community all communicating, and he ties in Russia. That's the point. Go ahead.
Well, no, it's like if I look at a body of water and I say, what did you put in that water? Let's talk about clean water. I'm not anti-water. It just seems like the same argument. Or soap. I don't like sodium benzo. I don't like that. I don't want the chemicals in my soap. So I'm not anti-soap. I just want clean soap, So you have a lot of people that are of that mentality that are just like, maybe, I mean, I've talked to many doctors, not like, it's just like, it often gets framed as if it's the civilian world versus the science world. Like if you're a science denier, then you will be in the anti-vax group, which is just, there are plenty of scientists who have talked about this topic, but of course a lot of people aren't aware of that because their voices are really never, or rarely given a voice in the mainstream world. And I know that personally, that I was told I wasn't allowed to pitch, not even, do the stories. I wasn't even allowed to pitch the stories. That was what I was told about people and doctors and scientists that were, questioning, say, the CDC vaccination schedule and its effect on young children. That wasn't even something I was allowed to pitch a story about. But but it's just crazy. Like that's the empire, not the pharmaceutical company, which is crazy. So he goes on to say that the bad guys are winning, in part because health agencies either underestimate or deny the reach of anti-science forces and are ill-equipped to counter it. So he's really saying that, like, the people within his own group who are like, dude, I don't know, you might want to sit down for a second and just like take a breather and calm down. He's like, they don't get it. They don't get the danger here, that, we really need to be more aggressive than just educating, because that's what he thinks he's doing, but that's just not enough. So yeah, exactly because he doesn't necessarily detail specifically what he wants the UN to do, for instance, except for like take aggressive action. But what does he really mean by that? And then how does that spread into other worlds where the government decides this is our new thing that we've decided needs aggressive enforcement?
Right. It's a great question. There's no limitation here. If you, just so we're clear, this precedent has already been set with multiple actions in other locations around our politics. But in this case, you're right. We allow them this leeway to be like, well, this opinion, and it all stems back to that original concept of, fire in a theater, like words are violence. And this is suddenly and slowly well, that doesn't make sense, slowly undermined our free speech concept. Right. And so now we're at a point where he's going, well, this idea is dangerous. And then next it'll apply to anything else they're trying to use, or the vaccine passports themselves, or, the undermining of the technology is now undermining the freedom we're having. So now they're dangerous. This will apply however they want to apply it. And we've seen this over and over with this government, and we somehow can't learn our lesson. But if I want to quickly speak to the concept of science denier, This is the absurd, clownish way that we frame these things in this country over and over. How are you a science denier if you're just disagreeing with this one concept while pointing to scientific documentation, right? This is what they're trying to do. Is Peter knows that. He knows he's misrepresenting these people because he thinks he's right or because he's got an agenda. Either way, he's being dishonest. There are an endless amount. I just saw another report about doctors and scientists and for all over the world that wrote this massive letter about how this shouldn't be happening or how COVID-19 restrictions are wrong or the vaccine is unsafe. There are Nobel laureates and we have entire regulatory agencies of other governments who've independently researched this and said, no, that's not safe, right? Yet here he is acting like anybody anywhere is some fringe anti-science denier. Right. I mean, that is just ignorant and insulting. You know what I mean? But to your point about Super You, because I think that was the original question, because it's interesting that this is exactly what we're worried about is right. You're going to have these people that make these irrational arguments rooted in fear that have nothing really to back them up. And then all of a sudden you get this task force that's going to march around and saying, oh, this entire platform is riddled with anti-vax, even though all we're doing is discussing scientific documentation and saying you should have a right to see this. Then who knows what they can do? Right? Can they pull down the entire infrastructure? Can they this is something we've seen happen before. But like I was saying earlier, is we also have these laws that I think I trailed off. We also have these laws that we've seen passed in Canada that are directly calling out things like this, that say we need to be able to control the internet because of things just like this, right? This is problem, reaction, solution stuff. And we need to see this coming. Free speech doesn't have limits, guys. And I know we hate to say that today because, you're going to hurt someone's feelings. But the reality is if you think free speech has limits, you don't agree with free speech, period. We have laws. And if that free speech leads to breaking some sort of a law, I probably don't even agree with some of the ones that I would argue are there. But in any case, well, that is when you have some kind of a discussion. You don't get to just arbitrarily label certain speech that you don't like as leading to danger, because that's a never ending slippery slope. And we already see it happening. It's never ending.
The Rogan controversy where, he says younger people, if you're healthy, like, no, don't get it, which I've heard many doctors say. But then the pushback that he then acquiesced to is like, okay, I understand if you're saying you're doing it for others, but that's not, to me, that's not even that's not even real either, right? Because we don't the stuff I've read from the CDC and the FDA documents and everything says that that's why they're still saying mask and social distance and whatnot, because we don't know if the vaccine is keeping you from transmitting it to other people.
Yeah, exactly. And well, in fact, that we do know that based on the real world data from Israel and a lot of other locations, we saw a clear continuation of it after they got vaccinated. We've seen reports from the United States all over different states, right? Right now on the documentation, as of their last update, it clearly says, we don't know if this will protect from transmission. Right? So if they're stating that on the last discussion that the FDA released as of April or the end of May, how is it possible that we're arguing that these children need to get these things, even though they're healthy, even though we have a verifiable risk of blood clots, right? That's a fact. And even though they're trying to pretend like it's not, like Norway has proven that definitively, and so has other locations. And it's not even a secret. We can clearly see that this spike protein, based on the science, I've seen at least 5 scientific articles that I've shown on my show that clearly point out the spike protein alone is an issue, which means that if the vaccine's producing that, it's an issue, which we know it is. Right. So this is not secret. They're not trusting the science. So for him to pull back on that was pressured by some kind of a higher power. Right? You're Spotify, the government, who knows? But to walk back that, to say that how is it? I would love for anybody to explain for me how a child who is at zero risk, according to the CDC, 0% risk in regard to COVID. That has never changed on the CDC website. It also states that in Canada, 19 and below, 0%. So if they're at 0% risk, somebody explain for me how taking this thing that there is a guaranteed risk of a certain percentage, even if it's small, how does that then protect other people? Because asymptomatic transmission has been shown to be non-existent. 10 million people were surveyed. 300 were found to be asymptomatic. None of them were transmissible. That's science. I don't know why we're not trusting the science, right? So how are they protecting other people by taking that? There's no answer there.
My question has always been, is if you're asymptomatic after getting the vaccine, does that mean you're asymptomatic? And so you're not going to transmit it, in which case maybe their argument is right? Or does it mean that you're just asymptomatic, but you still have the viral load, and because of the vaccine, you don't know that you have COVID, and so you're more likely to spread it?
Well, these are unanswerable questions, because we know that the PCR test, which they're using to decide whether people are whatever they want to call them, is wildly unrealistic. I mean, multiple PhDs, like Scoglio PhD, Dr. Scoglio did this live on the air, tested a kiwi fruit, came back positive. Multiple people have done this, and this guy's a respectable individual. And he says that upwards of between 30, I think it was between 35 and 45 cycle threshold, which, if I could explain that for people if they want to know that, is upwards of 97% false positives. So my point is, the science clearly found that people with asymptomatic transmission is literally not a problem with COVID-19, multiple studies. So to then test people with a PCR test and say, oh, they're asymptomatic, which we know has a false positive that even the CDC admits to, they know they're perpetuating the illusion. How can they not? It's ridiculous.
One of the subscribers for my channel told me that after getting the vaccine, his test came back negative, antibody test. So I don't even know what's going on there.
How about this? How about the fact that there's a lot of these things that might be, we're already seeing crossover between people being told they're positive after the vaccine because of the spike protein. Like some of these tests are actually cute. Again, this is, science that I have, like, when I've actually tried to read into this specific point, and there's a lot of this stuff that's quite confusing. That's why I research and ask PhDs and Nobel laureates. But the point is that one of these tests actually, there's a part of it that is specifically tied to the spike protein. So the idea is, if you have the vaccine that produces the spike protein in your body, are you then going to test positive regardless? Right? It seems like a self-perpetuating problem. Nobody's answering these questions, because if you bring up anything that questions whether PCR tests are absolute, whether vaccines will cure everything you ever had in your life, then they won't listen to you, and none of those things are true. I mean, and the science is very clear on that. Here's a good point. I just went over the FDA document about Pfizer and biotech, the one that they re-released that literally now says in bold, these are mandatory. And it says you can't give this to people under 16. It says that we pregnant women and so on. That's happening right now.
Wow.
So how is that, if they're clearly even reiterating it to the point that, like, big bold letters that everybody has to do this? Or here's a better one. They say very clearly that if you're going to give this vaccine, you have to tell the person that this is an unapproved vaccine that's been authorized for emergency use, in, like, bold. And yet online right now, you can ask anyone that's been vaccinated, is this approved? They'll say, of course it's approved. Now, why is it not happening? Are they not being told? Is the media not informing them? Yes, on both counts. So who's not following the rules?
And if you're watching this video on YouTube, here is my disclaimer that it's been cut short. Why? To incentivize you to go to my other platforms where you'll find it in its entirety, along with other exclusive content, platforms that are less likely to kick me off. So if you're interested, check out the links in the description, and I'll see you next time.